do you like the feeling of power you have as a newspaper proprietor of being able to sort of formulate policies for a large number of newspapers in every state of Australia?
Well, there's only one honest answer to that, of course, and that's yes. Of course one enjoys the feeling of power. The newspaper can create great controversies, stir up arguments within the community, discussion. It can throw light on injustices, just as it can do the opposite. It can hide things and be a great power for evil. It's not a perfect system, obviously, but can you think of a better one?
Hello and welcome to episode 13 of Murdocracy, a podcast that keeps an eye on the news and influence of News Corp, the most influential media company in the Western world. I'm Cam Wilson.
And I'm Sammy Shah.
Sammy, what comes up when someone Googles your name?
Well, hopefully my website or my Wikipedia or something. There's a lot of things articles written about me from people I pissed off over the years.
Oh, yeah.
So I'm sure some of those come up as well. And then there was briefly a columnist in Pakistan, also named Sammy Shah. And a journalist and writing columns in Pakistan for the same newspaper I used to once write for. And so his columns sometimes come up. And then poor guy apparently gets death threats and abuse that's directed at me. And he gets very confused as to why people hate him so much. And I have to tell him, no, they hate me, not you. You're fine.
Well, look, if you're getting death threats, at least you can kind of spread them out over two people. That's pretty handy.
That's what I figure. It's good to share that around.
Are you more famous than the other Sammy Shah?
For now.
For now. Oh,
for now.
I can't say
I think famous and notorious are two applicable adjectives. Yes.
All press is good press.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, speaking of website, I recently nabbed wilson.cam. That's my personal one. But also this week, the Australian domain registrar, or the one that's in charge of all of them, released a new Australian domain ending that can just end in .au rather than .com.au. So I have registered, but there's a 6-month waiting period to see if anyone objects. Cam.au. So I'm really hoping that I get
Cam.au is a good one.
I know, it'd be really good. So, but yeah, no, when I search myself, and the relevance will come up soon. It's funny that you mentioned that there's another Sammy Shah who works at the same publication. There was another Cameron Wilson who used to work for the ABC, and he apparently was I think you reported for the Bush Telegraph, which was a radio program on
the ABC,
ABC. And all the time I would get just super lovely emails saying, great to see you still going and love your work. Definitely not for me. So I actually got to ride on his coattails, which was lovely. No death threats, all good things. And so I highly recommend that if you can get the chance to be named after someone else who's well respected.
Yeah, no, I'm definitely going to rename myself Stephen Fry or Dalai Lama or something along those lines.
Oh, I think the Dalai Lama might stick around. Isn't that how it works? Okay, hey, so for this episode, a little bit later on, I'll be chatting to Steve Mascord. He is the author of a new book about the birth of the NRL. I cornered him to chat about the relationship between the rugby league competition and News Corp. Some pretty interesting stuff, including some pretty big fights, and not only how News Corp shaped the NRL, but also how NRL shaped News Corp. So it's very, very interesting. But Sammy, I also know that you have something you want to promote.
I do indeed. Thank you very much, Cam. I am doing a run of shows, comedy shows at the Melbourne International Comedy Festival, the Sydney Comedy Festival, and the Perth Comedy Festival. The show is called Unappreciated, which basically speaks to my deep-seated insecurities. And it is about the fact that I've been in Australia for 10 years this year. It's been a bizarre journey so far, and I'm kind of looking back on the lessons I've learned over those 10 years. I'm doing the entire Melbourne Comedy Festival, so the 31st of March to the 24th of April at the Chinese Museum. I've got a show over there, which is very strange because I'm performing amongst Ming vases and jade sculptures.
Oh, that sounds cool.
It's really cool. It'll definitely be the first 5 minutes of every night will be me talking about that. And so that's on, and then in Sydney, I'm there for 2 days in May, and then 1 day in Perth. So far, 1 day. If we sell out the 300-seat theatre, then we'll add another day as well. So hopefully that can happen.
Right, yeah.
And tickets available on thesammyshah.com or on the Comedy Festival websites.
Oh, cool. And is there any, like, if someone is not in Melbourne who's listening to this podcast, is there any other way, like, can you stream it, or will you be putting up a version of it later on?
So I will be putting up the audio from the festival show on my Patreon. That's patreon.com/Sammy Shah for all of my subscribers. And then eventually later in the year, I'll try to release it as a comedy album or a YouTube video, YouTube special or something like that. So that there's definitely going to be that down the line. But, that's not for a while still.
And nothing beats being there in person.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, the live experience is just a whole other thing. Even for me, like, I love comedy and stand-up comedy. I go to as many live comedy shows as possible because it's just so much fun. I'm going to go watch Ronnie Cheng tomorrow because I love Ronnie's comedy, but, and it would be so much better to watch it in person.
That sounds really, really great. I'm jealous. In fact, even just going back to the cinema for the first time since COVID.
What did you watch?
You're gonna laugh at me. I went and saw the new Jackass film.
Of course you did.
On my honeymoon in Byron Bay.
On your honeymoon?
Yeah, because my wife's into it as well, totally.
Cool.
And
all right, okay.
It was awesome. It was just like the perfect, because it mixes the gross with the cringe and the you're scared for their lives. That's like the perfect thing to see in an audience after you haven't been in a big crowd close with them, laughing, crying in so long. So that was a great experience. But yeah, I would I totally I'm all about the live experience now, and I don't think I'm going to be up there, Sammy, but I would highly recommend anyone who is going to be around to check it out.
Yes. All right, cool. I will come to Sydney for my Sydney Comedy Festival shows, and that's when we can finally hopefully meet up as well.
Yeah, totally. So for the News Corp news of the week, I was scrolling through Twitter last night when I saw this tweet from the Judith Nielsen Institute, which is a philanthropic organization that's been putting money into journalism for a couple of years now. And it was quoting Christopher Dorr, who is the editor-in-chief of The Australian. Later, I would find out that he was the first speaker at a new lecture series they're doing called The Editors. And he was saying that there is an irrational and pious obsession with tearing down News Corp journalism. According to reporting by Amanda Mead, The Australian's editor, he rallied against Twitter. He said that some journalists were so vain, self-obsessed, craving, indulgent, and needy that they were undermining their profession and they should stick to reporting and not give their opinion.
That's cruel. You shouldn't say that about Andrew Bolt and Rita Panahi and Rowan Dean and Piers Morgan. That's they work for the same people. That's very awkward for him in the workplace.
Yeah, and at one point he even Googled his name and The Australian on stage and went through critical things that people were saying of them. He said that there were a cohort of senior journalists who prey on others actively, almost reflexively mocking, ridiculing, and actively undermining the work of some quite courageous journalists who believe they do not conform. Sammy, I thought the kind of same thing as you. Does this not sound a little bit like he was talking about some of the same people under his roof just as much as he was talking about other people?
Yeah, it's very much physician heal thyself. Like it's very strange for him to be talking about irrational and pious obsession with tearing down anything, given that he works for News Corp, and their irrational pious obsession with tearing down anything on the opposite side of the political and social political aisle. Like it's very strange. And also Googling yourself on stage is the most crass thing you could have done. Look, you're in the public eye. The way we work as journalists now is journalists are not just representative of the newspaper or organization they work for, but also their own brand. That's the way Twitter and everything works. And so criticism comes everyone's way, and you can't work for an organization that is so, famously questionable in some of their journalistic choices and then expect people to not to have an opinion. But also, people have an opinion on everything. If you Google Bluey right now on Twitter, there'll be people who hate Bluey for some reason. No one loves everything universally, and everyone has an opinion on everything. So why is he acting like this is such a rare experience for News Corp journalists? ABC journalists cop the same amount of abuse all the time.
First of all, I take an issue with the fact that there's anyone out there who hates Bluey. It is like universally beloved. I don't know if you saw it. So Disney Plus, sorry, this is such a digression, but Disney Plus for the first time, I think, included them as part of their viewing numbers. And it was the seventh most watched show, I think, with like 300 million views in the last month. Something crazy. Like
Mhm.
arguably, it's one of Australia's biggest cultural exports. That aside, the fact that you mentioned the ABC is so right, because the way that News Corp reports on the ABC is exactly as they kind of as exactly as Christopher Dorr explained, and the idea to be so thin-skinned while doing that as well, just oh my god, it's kind of breathtaking, and of course he must be conscious of it. But look, I mean, yeah, look, I mean, journalists, generally take a lot of criticism, and I can understand how anyone would feel that way. But to really direct that elsewhere is I mean, I would say tone deaf, but I think they know exactly what they're doing. The other interesting thing, I think, is that so this Judith Nielsen Institute
Mm.
is has been set up in the last few years, still very new, and it has been doing it's been splashing money into journalism, and so as a result, people in the industry, particularly an industry that isn't one that's exactly flush with cash at the best of times, um, y- not a lot of people want to actually like critique them, and maybe
Mhm.
saying this is going to get me in a little bit of trouble. And if you're listening, Judith Nielsen or anyone associated with it, this is a fair critique and shows my journalistic chops, and that's why you should be giving me a whole boatload of money. But the thing that the thing that I've noticed is that they have really decided to support a real like centrist version of journalism, and really say that they're that we're for like promoting innovative and exciting journalism, but I've just really ended up a lot of the time funneling money to already the biggest names, particularly like News Corp. Like they
Mhm.
paid all this money. Sorry, I should say they sponsored, and assuming that means that there's a lot of money going to news.com.au. Now that's News Corp's, big commercial website. It's the second most visited in the country. It's the biggest commercial one. And they supported them to do a climate change fact-checking series last year. And to me, that just struck me as absolutely insane, because you had, the Australian, which had been peddling, misinformation about climate change. This was 6 months after the bushfires, when they had been saying that we could link the increase in fires to like arsons and not actually climate change. And then another arm of the company is getting philanthropic money to then run a series debunking the same things that the other arm of the company had kind of promoted in the first place. Is that not
So
insane?
are you telling me that a filthy, massively, grotesquely rich person has set up an organization that really benefits News Corp, which is quite famously quite let's say sensitive, if not sensitive, biased towards the plight of the rich and the wealthy?
Yeah. Am I saying there might be a bit of class solidarity in action? I mean,
Mm-hmm.
maybe. I mean, they also, and this is getting so into the weeds, but like there was another thing where they were hosting an event where they hosted. I think it was, or they no. So they announced that they were sponsoring Quillette, which for most
Yes.
people you probably wouldn't know it, but this is a publication that really, is. It's not just that it's right wing, but has platformed some pretty gross views, including some like people who've talked about, what they like to call race science, which is,
Yes.
usually like arguing that non-white people aren't as smart as white people.
Mm-hmm.
And even
Are
kind of getting to,
genetically inferior, things like that. Yeah,
exactly,
that's right.
that kind of stuff. Like, they are really this kind of fringe online publication, very contrarian. They're actually founded in Australia, but I think most of their audience would be overseas. But they had gotten money from this, and I just like, not a lot of people I think want to actually say, what are you guys doing? Because everyone would rather just, kind of bite their tongue and say, if there's money coming my way, I'd rather put
Mm-hmm.
myself in a good position for it. But it is funny that, when they are like, we want to make sure that journalism is sustainable, is doing good work. And the first one that they get in the first series of their editors is the head of the Australian, and he uses that to essentially rail against the fact that people are
Mm-hmm.
too woke. Is that really having the intended result? I'm not so sure.
Look, it's their money. They're going to spend it how they want to spend it, and we can judge them for how they spend it. And that's literally all we can do, because they've got a ton of money and we don't. Here's the thing: if the Judith Nielsen Institute really wants to show that they care about quality journalism and the improvement of the journalism that is conducted in Australia overall, they should give at least $1 million to Murdocracy, the podcast, through our Patreon. That's patreon.com/Murdocracy. And then we will take a more unbiased view of their opinions.
Here. I think that would only be fair to have balance.
Exactly.
So I was reading an interesting story about how the NRL is set to allow Melbourne Storm players, that's a players for a team, to invest in an online betting company owned by their chairman, a guy called Matt Tripp, and News Corp. And this was reported by the Sydney Morning Herald chief sports writer Andrew Webster. When I spotted this line, News Corp is desperate for a place in the Australian wagering market following the success of Fox Bet in the US, and is only weeks away from partnering with Tripp, who is eyeing off potential investors. Now, I know we've mentioned sports betting before, but I assume it's really only a matter of time until News Corp gets what they want and figures out something to do in Australia. But I want to ask you, Sammy, have you noticed just how much advertising there is for gambling now in Australia?
We actually, in one of my classes at university, were discussing this because we were talking about advertising on news websites and how that sometimes that raises questions about the ethics of the news and the relationship between advertisers and news. And one of my students, to prove his point, opened up several Australian news websites. And I obviously, if anyone knows me, they know I haven't been to an Australian sports news website ever in my life. I have no idea what sports even is most of the time. And I was shocked, genuinely, truly shocked by the level of advertising for gambling on those websites. Australian sports news websites aren't sports news websites. They're gambling websites with a little bit of sports news thrown in on the side. It feels like when you look at the kind of branding around everything.
It is incredible how much advertising you see on sporting websites, and clearly there's so much money in it. The other interesting place that I really see it kind of sneaking into is where you see betting in things like politics stories, when we say preferred prime minister, here are the odds, or sometimes when a news event happens and people will be like, well, here's the event, here's the odds for someone to become the next host of 7:30. And I kind of always say that, I think sometimes people give too much credit to a gambling lines as if people know something that they don't, whereas often they really don't. People are just kind of going for the most of the time off the same information that we all have, and I think it's kind of insidious, I don't really want to have that stuff in all my politics. I don't really want everything just to be commercialized. But the one thing I did find out about those kind of news and politics and sometimes when they've got betting on something like The Bachelor or another reality TV show, is that they know that those are actually loss leaders. And very often they'll actually set up bets with something that seems like, right now there would be I'll give $1.10 to Peter Dutton to be the next leader of the Liberal Party, and some maybe a small amount for Josh Frydenberg as well. And the purpose is because they're not actually thinking they're going to make money off it, but by getting big events where they think they can lure in people to bet, well, then you've kind of got them to create a betting account. And that's the biggest hurdle. You've already got them into the ecosystem. And that's one of the smart things that they're doing to try and to get people used to it. And to me, it kind of grosses me out.
Yeah, I think, look, there's nothing about the way Australia has a relationship with betting, particularly sports betting, but overall gambling, that is not disgusting. I don't understand why it's so accepted. I don't know. The arguments that are always put forward to me is, and even when I was at the ABC, senior journalists or, listeners on the radio would always say, oh, look at how much money it brings in. Where else can we get that kind of money? I mean, if that's the only, moral quality we have in terms of if it brings in money, then let's do it. Then fuck it, let's bring back slavery, and also human trafficking should be legal. And why not allow some cocaine production on Australia's shows as well? We'll make tons of money from it. We'll do great. The economy will benefit for sure. Lots of jobs that to be had. I don't understand why gambling is just seen as a necessary evil because of the money it provides. And we can see the detrimental effects it has on sports, on society, on mental health, on so many different things.
Yeah, I mean, I feel the same way about something like pokies where, I know people argue, it's a bit of fun and, people most of the time are okay. But the upside is so little. If it is just entertainment, well, there's plenty of ways you can be entertained. But the downside, what it does to families, what it does to people who are really, addicted or out of control. It's very, very sad. So no, I struggle with that. I'm kind of I like to think I'm a bit socially liberal and people can do whatever, but I do find it not. I don't know if I could pull the trigger and
Right.
and make it more legal. So
I genuinely think it's the kind of thing which, if maybe in a generation or so, we look at back at the gambling stuff in sports, even, and can treat it the same way we did smoking. We were like, can you believe people used to smoke everywhere? We'd be like, can you believe there were pokies everywhere and you could just bet on every game publicly and that was legally allowed? I hope so.
yeah. Hey, speaking of things that I think we'll look back on and shake our heads. So there was a Jewish group that's called for an end to careless public Nazi comparisons after a News Corp columnist likened Queensland public servants to German wartime propagandist Joseph Goebbels. Peter Gleeson, the Courier Mail, also, by the way, a host of Sky News Australia, he wrote, SEQ Water, which is, I think, Southeast Queensland Water Public Utility, continues to trot out the line that they did everything right during the latest floods with the release of water from the Ivanhoe Dam. It was following the manual, it says. That was just German propaganda, Joseph Goebbels' favorite line. That was what he said. Beyond the obvious issue, of course, of comparing public servants to Nazis, it also wasn't actually Goebbels, but it was Adolf Eichmann, who was later found guilty of war crimes too. So, really, really just wrong on all accounts.
And also the wording wasn't, it was following the manual. The wording was just following orders. I mean, there's a lot. Basically, one of the things that Peter Gleeson has shown is that even basic research is beyond him. Just the arrogance involved in writing a column, not taking a second to do any research. The Jewish group that's going to condemn this is the Anti-Defamation Commission, which is chaired by Dr. Devere Abramovich. I've met Devere several times. I interviewed him for my documentary. Look, sometimes he makes decisions that I think are questionable. He's for example gone after Nazim Hussain once because Nazim Hussain made a joke on stage which included every religious group, including Jews. And he said that Nazim is anti-Semitic. And then there's another time when they kind of campaigned against the game Secret Hitler, saying that it's promoting Hitler, even though the point of the game was that you never know who amongst you could have fascist tendencies, and it's a good way of understanding that about society. So I think sometimes they're a bit quick on the trigger. I think in this case there is a validity to the argument, is that we have made so light of the Nazi references, and everything's a Nazi and everyone's a Nazi, and all sides of politics kind of play this game sometimes where it's the Godwin's law, but in not just the internet, but in real life now. That we're not even bothering to fact check anymore. We're just throwing names like Joseph Goebbels and everything around. I think if anything, they should have said, the complaint should have been, at least get your facts right. If you're going to quote, a Nazi leader, then at least make sure you're getting the right one, so it shows that you have an understanding of what you're talking about.
Yeah, it also doesn't say much about your worldview. That's something that's, important to some people, but is not on the scale of that. Making that comparison is pretty gross. Your life must be going pretty well if that's the biggest thing you got going on. And the other thing is, and this is me really, on being a journalist sociopath, but I'm just saying, God, can't we just come up with something more interesting to say? You're a columnist, your job is to argue and introduce interesting ideas, and just comparing someone you don't like to Nazis is it's pretty done. I'm over it.
It was, you know what really exhausted the Nazi thing was when anti-vaxxers were complaining that the vaccine mandate was equivalent to 1930s Germany. And I was like, okay, all right, we're done. At this point, even the Nazi comparison have jumped the shark. But now I think I said that too soon, because comparing it to SEQ Water continuing to trot out the line that they did everything the latest floods, and comparing that to Goebbels is clearly the jumping of the shark moment.
And just a little thing, because this is really my area of expertise. Having done a lot of anti-vaxxers, also Adolf Hitler notoriously was actually in opposition to vaccine mandates. So the anti-vaxxers, along with Peter Gleeson, not to crash hot on their history.
Yeah, turns out.
And finally, Sammy, are you in the market for some property?
Always. Do you know anything that going for $300 to $400? Because that's my budget.
Well, if you can scrounge a couple extra more, I do know there is someone who's looking to sell. That is 91-year-old billionaire Rupert Murdoch. He's looking to sell 2 of his Midtown Manhattan condos for $78 million US, according to real estate listings written by Business Insider's Ben Gilbert. Murdoch purchased the properties in 2014. He reportedly paid about $57.25 million. So if he sells it for his asking price, he stands to make shy of $21 million on the sale. Pretty nice, huh?
I mean, look, here's what I'm going to say. If the Judith Nielsen Institute gives us millions of dollars to show that the Judith Nielsen Institute is genuinely in favor of journalism, then we can use those millions of dollars to purchase Rupert Murdoch's Manhattan condos. At least one of them. Not the maybe not two. I don't want to get greedy, but let's say we buy one of them and turn that into our podcasting headquarters. We don't even have to go there. I mean, I don't know. It's clearly a way of him showing that he's unbiased as well. He gives it to us at a discount price.
True.
You know,
That's
like
true.
so. There's a lot of things that have to work out in our favor for this to happen. But I'm a dreamer. I really am, and I feel like I deserve. We deserve a $78 million Manhattan condo.
And as such close studies of his work, his life, his empire, sure, we're handing it down. It's practically like handing it down in the family.
Exactly. I mean, by the way, you can look at a picture of the condo if you look at if you Google. I think it's called One. The building is called One Madison in Manhattan's Flatiron district, and basically the penthouse, which is what he has, is 3 stories, and there's like it's an apartment that's 3 floors.
I'm looking at it now
with wall-to-ceiling windows and a stair. Yeah.
But not much privacy, so you know what? No, not for me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, oh, that's it. You're right. Absolutely. Yeah. Fair enough. Good point. All right. Never mind. We cancel the order.
Okay. And now I'm joined by Steve Mascord, who is the author of Two Tribes, The Untold Story of Rugby League's Divided Year, which is all about 1997 and all the lead up to it. Steve, welcome.
Hey, Cam, how are you, mate? Good evening well. To you.
Yeah.
Good evening to you. It's morning where I am.
Yeah, you're speaking to us from the UK. Whereabouts?
I'm in London. London.
Beautiful. Now, you just had this book came out. It caught my eye because I started to find out a little bit about News Corp's relationship with the NRL. But first of all, take us to where things were in 1997. Where was rugby in Australia?
Well, rugby league initially, I always say rugby league as a breakaway from rugby union. The seeds of discontent are always in the garden of rugby league. But in 1994-95, Rupert Murdoch came along with a big watering can because pay television was being introduced to Australia. He wanted rugby league as a bulwark there, as he had used the NFL in the US and Premier League here in the UK. Rugby league had already sold its pay TV rights. Basically sold them to Kerry Packer to do nothing, to warehouse them for $1 million. So what happened was, and News had a very, very strong relationship with the establishment of rugby league. Obviously, rugby league sells a lot of newspapers, a lot of tabloid newspapers in New South Wales for Murdoch, and the merchandising arm of the New South Wales Rugby League, and then it became the Australian Rugby League. Was run by News Limited. So a very, very tight relationship. I remember as a reporter, it was difficult getting an exclusive out of Phillip Street because they would all go to Holt Street. But because of this a corporate battle, basically News soon put themselves in an adversarial position with the Australian Rugby League and started up their own competition, recruiting clubs who were unhappy with the status quo.
The relationship got pretty sour at times, didn't it?
Well, you don't get much more sour than starting a rival competition. There's never been two. There's never been two competitions. I know we had World Series cricket, which was exactly the shoe on the other foot, wasn't it? With Packer starting a competition, so they could hardly take the high moral ground in that regard. But there were two competitions in 1997 and 1997 only, and that was the year before News's pay television interests began. And so the relationships were very poor, but nonetheless. And this is what we saw was that Kerry Packer at the start of 1997, after the ARL went to war on his behalf, actually signed a deal with Super League to show Super League on Monday nights, which sort of showed. I guess I've been theorising with people, Cam, that these days, a contract really just dictates the number of zeros on the end of a settlement. But back then, a contract. These were rugby league men, and a contract was a contract, and they were willing to basically put themselves in existential danger to protect their contract with Kerry Packer after he threatened to sue the pants off all of them. But he wasn't, it turns out, as serious as they were, and Packer and Murdoch ended up making peace.
So how did the year end up setting the tone for, I guess, the following decades of NRL?
Well, it formed the NRL. So the NRL didn't exist before 1998. So basically, the Super League competition wasn't terribly successful, but it was very well funded, as you'd imagine, because Murdoch poured, by the end of the war, some $600 million into it. So, but in Sydney, people switched off the sport. If you have a look at the clippings, or if you're a Swans fan, you'll look back on 1997, 96 as a good period where you got a lot of back pages and a lot of publicity because people in Sydney switched off the sport. But the great piece of serendipity, you would say, for rugby league was that the only place that really still cared was Newcastle, blue-collar, working-class New South Wales, steel town. And of all the years for them to win the competition, they won the competition that year. So the ARL managed to have some basically the only people in the country who still cared in their corner when it came time to broker peace. And the News Limited, their clubs was well funded, but were losing support. So as a result, a peace deal was done. We lost a lot of the expansion teams, so there were no more. There was no Adelaide, no Gold Coast, and then the following year, no Perth, no South Queensland, which is the second team in Brisbane. We're just getting that back now, second team in Brisbane. So basically, it ended. It pretty much killed off expansion. Everything that News Limited hoisted the spinnaker regarding expansion, internationalism. All those things took a backward step in rugby league, and it was back to grassroots because the grassroots by the end of 1997 were the only area that still cared. And we got a lot of merged teams. You'll notice that all the teams that were forced to merge were ARL teams because they had no money. So we had St George Illawarra, we had the Northern Eagles, we had West Tigers, but the likes of Canterbury, Penrith, Cronulla, they benefited from siding with News Corp because they still stand alone to this day.
Wow, that's so interesting. So I guess, zooming forward a couple of years, I was reading about how the kind of relationship went, into the 2010s. And I read something saying that the NRL signed their big TV deal with Nine on quite an important day, or I guess like a noteworthy day. It was the first day that Murdoch came. It was the first day of Murdoch's visit to Australia, which is like, seems like something that is almost like intentionally meant to inflame tensions.
Well, the thing is, because that was one of the former CEOs of the NRL, David Smith, who's subsequently hunted out, you would say by pressure from media partners, including News and also some of the clubs. But the most important thing to understand is from 1998, and my book finishes on with a few, another chapter of bits and pieces from after there, but it finishes on December 1997, is that News were a partner in the NRL for another sort of, I guess, a decade. So News was sitting on both sides of the table during TV negotiations. They were negotiating with themselves, and as a result, most people in the sport feel that the pay television income was artificially low. Then we had the formation of the ARL Commission, which was truly independent, and what you describe is the height of the NRL's independence, where they set up their own digital arm for a sports rights apocalypse, so that they would actually sell direct. And strangely enough, that's what John Quayle and Ken Arvidsson first envisaged in the late 80s, that the then New South Wales Rugby League would have its own pay TV station. As soon as the idea of pay TV first sort of floated through the door, we ended up ended up kind of getting it where the NRL through the ARLC had this enormous amount of independence. And then with COVID, we saw Channel 9 claw back its iron grip really on the sport, which is what started the Super League war, where the Channel Hugh Marks made comments about we don't buy rights off the NRL, we buy them off the clubs, and the NRL should be just a shell, and basically inciting the clubs to rise up at the beginning of COVID against the NRL, and as a result, Todd Greenberg was removed or departed from his job as CEO at the NRL, and the digital arm of the ARL, which was of the ARLC and the NRL, which was its bomb shelter from the collapse of pay TV rights economy. It blew up its own bomb shelter. There is now there's just a token digital operation. You can't stream games on the NRL site. So we had a period, basically. I know I'm sounding a bit long-winded here, Cam.
No, it's interesting.
But we had a period of just under a decade where the NRL built up an independence from, and that was the height of it, was signing with a contract with Channel 9 when Rupert Murdoch arrived and the all that sort of stuff. We are now back to the point we were before the war, where the ARL is completely beholden. Sorry, the NRL and the NRL is completely beholden to its rights partners, which are Nine and Fox, and it's actually at their behest. It has destroyed its own escape route from that relationship. Things tend to go in cycles.
It's so similar. It took you back to the ARL just talking about it. So I guess, we've talked about how important News Corp has been to the NRL over the years. What about the other way around? How important is the NRL to News Corp and, as you mentioned, their tabloids and to, I guess, the premise of pay television?
Well, the big thing that people outside, the people who follow rugby league and follow the war would be aware of, but maybe others aren't, is that when South Sydney were a victim of rationalisation, they were broke, and even when they came back into the competition, they had players picking weeds at training as part of the roster system. They were so impoverished. But people don't know that until Russell Crowe came along and Peter Holmes' Court. But taxi drivers would not pick up at Fox Studios as a protest against News Limited while South Sydney were out of the competition. And even in the book, so even in sort of mid-1997, John Hartigan, the CEO at News, actually addressed all the clubs and said, we're going to give you equal coverage at the ARL. He went to the ARL clubs, we're going to give you equal coverage, we're not going to be biased towards our own competition, because frankly, News's readers didn't have vision. They weren't interested in rugby league going to Shanghai. They wanted to follow East, Souths, Wests, and Norths. So the war really hurt News Limited's standing in Sydney, and the end of the war. The reason that News were able to negotiate with a much worse resourced rival and come up with a somewhat equitable solution was the fact that the public uprising against what Super League had done to the game. Hello?
Just cut out for a second. That's fascinating, Steve. So I guess finally, let's look forward. I mean, we've got the introduction of digital platforms that mean that Foxtel isn't necessarily needed anymore. Obviously, News has its KO as well. Sports leagues like rugby, like the NRL, like all the ones around the world, are now thinking, well, there's all these new partners who they can potentially partner with and sell their games and to connect with their viewers. In fact, they can even do it directly, hypothetically. Where do you see this relationship going in the future?
Not as far as it should, and one of the reasons for that is personality driven. Peter V'landys, who is the chairman of the ARLC and the NRL, has always had an extremely tight relationship with News, News and Channel 9 never liked NRL.com, and Peter V'landys blew it up. So, and a lot of people in Sydney who are closer to things than I am think that Peter V'landys gets a pretty good run as far as criticism is concerned in popular press in Sydney.
Funny how that works.
And of course, and let's not forget, he's also in charge of Racing New South Wales, who pay for these supplements in print media at a time when print media advertising is in free fall. So the same organisations that rely on Racing New South Wales for income for their print products are also the rights holders for the NRL's television. So as a result of that, as a fan of the NRL, I'm not particularly confident in their independence and ability to make the most of these new opportunities in the digital space. Not at all. I believe that that Channel 9 has one of the NRL's balls and News Limited has the other.
Well, with that stunning visual, I think we might call it. Steve, thank you very much. It was super fascinating to hear about it. And, I think you really do see, how it does show you a couple of the tactics that come up from News Corp again and again, how they know how to use their market power. But how, at the end of the day, they also are beholden to their audience, and I think sometimes people forget that as well. Steve, if people want to buy your book, is there a preferred place, and is there somewhere to follow you online as well?
There is. Before we go, I think I should add also that News. I think News do have always liked rugby league, and I think rugby league actually suits that kind of corporate cowboy Sydney culture. But in keeping with many of the ways News interacts with various things, it's been chaotic over the years, and it's been kind of at times walking around in the dark. But it's also been an absolute lack of reluctance to use that corporate muscle when they wanted to and needed to. So anyway, the book is available at stevemascord.com/product/2 tribes. If you're listening in Australia, Cam, maybe I'll make the discount code CAM. And you'll get $2.50 off. And if you're listening overseas, it's shop.stevemascord.com/product/2 tribes. Same discount code. And it's £1.99 off. And I'm sure that if you've got show notes, maybe you could throw those addresses in there. But I appreciate your time, and I appreciate everyone's interest in the book so far.
Same here. Thank you so much, Steve. Talk to you later.
Good on you, mate. Bye.
Thank you so much for listening. If you haven't already, please be subscribed. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, or just about everywhere you get podcasts. And also, please join our podcast group on Facebook at Murdocracy Podcast, and our Patreon, which is patreon.com/Murdocracy, to help support this podcast. I've said the word podcast too many times. Thank you so much to Kevin MacLeod for the theme music, the ABC for the recordings from the archive, and Ruby Innes for our artwork. And of course, thank you as always to you, Cam.
Thank you, Sammy. See you guys next week.
Bye. All right.